A fan film is exactly what the name implies, a film made by fans of a particular subject. In the case of Star Trek, these amateur productions have been around almost as long as Star Trek itself, with the earliest publicly available example dating back to 1967. Titled simply Star Trek, it's about what you'd expect of the genre. Kids utilizing the family Super 8 camera, makeshift uniforms that consist of hand-drawn insignia taped on t-shirts, living room doubling as the bridge, etc. The first noteworthy attempt to kick things up a notch came in 1974 with John Constantino's Paragon's Paragon, essentially an adaptation of James Blish's Star Trek novel Spock Must Die. The film ran about an hour, shot on 16mm film, featured a full-size recreation of the bridge set, more or less, and presented an ambitious variety of special effects on a budget of around $2,000, roughly $10,000 in today's dollars. Something to keep in mind is that through much of the history of fan films, Paramount gladly turned a blind eye to such activities, not just fan films, but bootleg ship models, costumes, fanzines, so on, so long as they didn't make any appreciable amount of money off of their intellectual property, i.e., not enough where it was worth it for Paramount to unleash the lawyers and shut it down. The next major attempt at a semi-pro level fan film came in 1985 with Yorktown, A Time to Heal, with the key selling points being George Takei appearing as Sulu, and James Shigeta as Admiral Nagura, the admiral who gave Kirk back command of the Enterprise in Star Trek Motion Picture. This project even got a write-up in Starlog magazine at the time. Unfortunately, the production was abandoned before completion and lay dormant for nearly 20 years, when work was resumed in 2010. Presumably, work is either finished or nearing completion, which only leaves the question of when it's finally going to be released, an issue common with fan films in general, especially with the more ambitious productions, as we'll soon see. December of 2002 saw the debut of Starship Exeter, featuring the adventures of a decontaminated and recrewed USS Exeter, last seen in the infamous original series episode The Omega Glory, under the command of Captain John Quincy Garevic, presumably related to Ensign Garevic on the Enterprise and the late Captain Garevic of the Farragut, both referenced in the original series episode Obsession. We meet a fairly diverse and interesting group of characters, and the first fan film production to present us with accurate recreations of the original sets. Uniforms and hand props are one thing, but building full-size sets is a whole nother level of commitment. Even most productions nowadays tend to go for the cheaper option of green screens. The debut episode, The Savage Empire, showed great promise, claymation monster notwithstanding, and a fan base started forming. Unfortunately, the second episode, The Tressarian Intersection, ran into a common enemy of most fan films, real life. Released one act at a time, the delay between the release of Acts 3 and 4 spanned more than a few years. In all, from principal photography to the release of the final act, it took nearly 10 years for the second episode to finally see the light of day. Needless to say, the third episode, The Atlantis Invaders, never happened. By the way, that bridge set now lives in Arkansas with a crew of Starship Ajax, another aspiring fan film group. The series took the approach many fan films take in depicting other ships and officers in the Star Trek universe away from the Enterprise, allowing the writers and actors to follow their own paths and not run afoul of the established canon. After all, it'd take some serious balls to actually take on the roles of Kirk, Spock, and the rest, right? Well, in 2004, James Cawley decided to grab onto the third rail of fan films and produce Star Trek New Voyages, with Cawley himself taking on the role of Captain Kirk. A former underling of Star Trek costume designer William Ware Tice, Cawley has made his money primarily as one of the world's most acclaimed Elvis impersonators, hence the jet black king of rock and roll pompadour. I like to think of this as an alternate timeline where Hawaii Five-0 didn't take off, Jack Lord had a slight change of heart regarding Star Trek, Shatner left after the third season, and Kirk is recast Darren Stevens style, with Jack Lord donned in the velour tunic for considerably less than the 50% ownership that he wanted the first time around. Just like any such production, first offerings are a little rough, with slightly dodgy camera work and frankly amateurish lighting. Thankfully, these issues were quickly resolved with subsequent episodes, although the second episode, In Harm's Way, became a touchdown for how not to depict the Enterprise. Whenever you hear somebody talking about the Enterprise zipping around like a colonial viper, this is what they're talking about. In 2008, the production changed its name to Star Trek Phase 2, a clear nod to the planned Star Trek Revival TV series that was shelved in favor of Star Trek The Motion Picture, itself an adaptation of what would have been the pilot for Phase 2. This wasn't just clever rebranding. The intent was to produce some of those unproduced Phase 2 scripts. This only got as far as The Child, which had already been adapted by the Next Generation to get around the writer's strike at the time, and Katoomba, a John Meredith Lucas story about the Klingons that required some serious reworking to bring it back in line with the Klingon society as we knew it as of the time of Enterprise. It was while developing a Norman Spinrad script, He Walked Among Us, a script initially pitched to the original series, that the friendly folks at CBS chimed in to remind Cawley that they still owned those scripts and really would rather prefer nobody else produce them. This was around the time of the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies, and CBS had developed a serious case of territoriality, putting the kibosh on that idea. This also marked the end to Cawley's turn as Captain Kirk, as he pulled back a bit to focus on producing the show, bringing in actor Brian Gross to take over the role of Kirk for the last of the production's 10 episodes. Although Starship Exeter initially kicked off the current state of fan films with faithful recreations of sets and higher quality visual effects, most folks do look to New Voyages as when Star Trek fan films kicked into high gear, partially because Cawley did grab that third rail by taking on the role of Kirk, garnering a lot of attention, both pro and con, and the fact that this production had the active participation of actual Star Trek veterans both in front of and behind the camera, most notably George Takei, Grace Lee Whitney, and Walter Koenig reprising those roles of Sulu, Rand, and Chekhov, but also scripts from Dorothy Fontana, Mark Zickery, and David Gerrold, who finally got to produce a version of his next-gen rejected AIDS allegory script, Blood and Fire. Gerrold would later take on showrunner duties on Phase 2 until they shut down in 2016. More on that later. It was during this period that more fan groups were inspired to build their own sets or arrange to borrow sets from other groups, and Star Trek fan films entered something of a golden age. Which brings us to the culmination of this cultural and creative process, Star Trek Continues. Produced by anime voice actor Vic Mignogna, with a cast of primarily experienced professional actors, as opposed to the usual group of enthusiastic amateurs, and their own batch of faithful recreations of the original sets, starting with the bridge and other set pieces acquired from Starship Farragut, another fan film production that, through bad luck, lost the loan of the warehouse that served as their soundstage, eventually including main engineering. The only other production to have an engineering set was Phase 2, and they never got to really use those on camera. Star Trek Continues set itself the goal of completing the 5-year mission and setting up the characters for where we find them in Star Trek the Motion Picture. And over the course of 11 full-length episodes, they accomplished that goal. What set Continues apart from other productions are a few factors. Every episode is made with a concerted effort to match up as closely as possible to the look and feel of the original series, from the signature colored lighting, the camera angles, and in this age of high-def widescreen, shooting in the original 4:3 screen ratio. The scripts were all consistent with those of the original series, including the subtle approach to current social issues, building upon established canon, and giving Mignogna that chance to chew up the scenery with true Shatnerian gusto. The vast majority of the cast of any episode are professional actors, with several guest stars well known to genre fans throughout the run, including Aaron Gray, John Delancey, Lou Ferrigno, and Colin Baker. Then on June 11, 2014, the fan film community started to turn upside down. Famous fan Alec Peters, previously known for dealing in rare Star Trek collectibles through his company Propworks, released a 20-minute documentary-style short, Prelude to Axanar. The intention was to set up the eventual production of a feature-length professional Star Trek story, Star Trek Axanar, which would tell the story of Garth of Izar and his role in the 4 Years' War, an incident prior to the original series, largely rooted more in fan speculation than hard canon, wherein the Klingon Empire and the Federation go to war, and we'd learn how and why Garth became the legendary starship captain that became a boyhood hero to James Kirk. Everyone in the cast, with the exception of Peters, was a well-known Star Trek or genre veteran. Peters, of course, cast himself as Garth. The visual effects were nothing short of spectacular, and the list of premiums for different levels of contributions was staggering. Donations reached over $2 million, and plans were announced to use the production of Axanar as the basis for an independent, for-profit studio where fans would be able to come in, produce their own projects in a professional-level facility. In the eyes of CBS, the current owners of Star Trek, that line where fan creators were not allowed to make any money from any of their projects was about to be crossed, and the lawyers were dispatched from on high, and the entire fan film community was about to pay the price for Axanar's ambitions. So it was, on December 29, 2015, CBS and Paramount Pictures filed a copyright lawsuit seeking damages in the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California, stating Axanar Works infringed their rights by making use of the Klingon language and innumerable copyrighted elements of Star Trek, including its settings, characters, species, and themes. The sword of Damocles that had hung over fan projects for decades had fallen, and Alec Peters, who likes to describe himself as a lawyer, even though he's never actually practiced law anywhere, seemed to revel in the attention and the conflict, while the entire fan film community very nearly ceased to exist in the carnage. In the middle of all this, mainly as a response to one of Peter's defenses that there weren't any guidelines to follow, so he couldn't be found guilty of violating rules that hadn't been laid down in the first place, on June 23, 2016, Paramount and CBS released Guidelines for Fan Films to head off any future mishaps and misunderstandings. The days of the property owners turning a blind eye to fan activities had come to an end. Groups that had projects already in active production were allowed to finish up as planned, allowing, for example, Star Trek Continues to complete their final batch of episodes. Phase 2, on the other hand, decided to just shut down production entirely, turning their soundstage into an officially licensed tourist attraction. Star Trek Horizon had just released a feature-length film set during the period of Star Trek Enterprise, and were planning a sequel, when they received a friendly advisory from CBS not to do that, so they just abandoned the project entirely. Everyone else pretty much sat back and started rethinking their projects. The outcome came on January 20th, 2017, when all parties agreed to a settlement wherein Alec Peters and Axanar Productions promised to make substantial changes to Axanar and agreeing to abide by the newly minted Guidelines for Fan Films, meaning that instead of the planned 90-minute feature, Axanar could be no longer than 30 minutes in two 15-minute segments, with no ads. As of the time of this video, Axanar has yet to begin production. And now let's take a look at those guidelines. These are not so much hard and fast rules as in these are the boundaries wherein you will not be sued. Stray outside the boundaries doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get sued, but it means you're taking your chances. So say bye-bye to continuing the series. I think this might be a gentle swipe at Star Trek Continues, because there was something, they did use the word official a few things, but I think it's more like they were referring to this is the official site for the production, not that they're official in CBS's eyes, but just to head it off. For anyone claims that, yes, this is canon. No, it's not. I think this is referring to any ideas about doing a mashup. Say, let's say the popular Star Trek Doctor Who crossover. And also, and you can't use stock footage. Recreating scenes is pretty much out, which would also nix, a vignette and an opening scene for a couple of Star Trek Continuous episodes. But pretty much, it's got to be original, and it's got to be legal. So. All right, this has been misinterpreted a few times, saying, that you can't make you can make your own uniforms. The thing is commercially available. So basically, you want to start your uniform, you're better buy the Novos ones or some other, or maybe a Rubies even, but something officially licensed. If it's not available, then you can make your own. Like if you want a phaser, you're better off using the Artist Island ones or the Diamond Select ones. But phaser rifles are kind of hard to come by, so you can make your own in that case. But they also don't want to be feeding the pirate market because, try proving that one. Basically, no more original series actors or I'm not sure this is entirely legal, though. Because I don't think they really have the authority to tell actors on their spare time what they can and cannot do. Okay? So if Gary Graham wants to show up as Soval in an episode, hey, what are you going to do? So I would change that if I had a way to say about it. Basically, you can spend more, but it's coming out of your own pocket. You can't do a Kickstarter and get more than $50,000. Although, frankly, a lot of productions are done for a lot less than $50,000, so that's pretty generous. Limited if you think about it. In other words, on YouTube or BitChute or something, and no monetizing it, so no ads. But yeah, you can't sell DVDs. No ads, no posting ads somewhere, no little bingo. Basically, this is a direct swipe at what Axonar was doing with models of the Ares, Axonar coffee, and other things like that. So no, you can't. For a $5,000 donation, you can have the uniform of Captain What's-His-Face. No. Basically, that territory is reserved for Star Trek Discovery because all of it's there in the first season. That seems fair enough. Yeah, any ideas you have about doing a copyright on this? No. Those days are long gone, and they were kind of dodgy back then, frankly. Basically, proceed at your own risk. And don't be surprised if one day they decide to pull the plug on it and everything comes coming to crash now. Remember, this is also production of the Moonves era, so yeah, they got the little putting another sword up, ready to fall if somebody crosses the line. So that's the general status right now and a few of my thoughts. So comments down below, also links down below if you want to support the channel, PayPal, Patreon, etc., etc. And we'll talk at you later.